Test, 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 test. Good evening and welcome to Zion's Banner. I'm just going to be checking the sound here, final sound checks, and making sure that everything works okay. And I'm also doing a little bit with the delay. Good evening and welcome to Zion's Banner. And I know the sound works now because I just heard myself. Hey, we're going to do things a little different. Not so much, but as we go through the slides, I want to get you guys involved. Let's consider this a little bit more interactive. So I decided to do a live, and I really like this idea because it's almost like we're in the same room together, going over this material and eliciting responses. And by the way, if you're new to the room, you can chime in too. Now, I have to admit, my last broadcast brought an interesting set of conversations with a woman who she indicated she was not born into Judaism, but probably one of those folks that Rabbi Singer had convinced to go ahead and convert to Judaism, and we finally had some good dialogue. But she was a little hot under the collar, and I've got to be ready for that too. So we're going to get started now. Before I do anything else, hey, we've got to go ahead. Hey, Becky is now on the credits there. Yes, I appreciate everybody, but some folks have just been part of the behind the scenes production staff, we'll just call it. And so I'm sticking that up there, and I'm going to give it a minute to play. Uh, you know, uh, and so I hope I'm not giving away any secrets, but Becky's full name, more officially, probably the thing on the birth certificate's Rebecca. So no big shocks there, right? I'm also going to be making sure that the live chat stays on so that we can actually converse. So here we go. We're going to get started, but I wanted to give credit. Now, everybody's important. But one of the things I promised on Patreon is that I would indeed give a shout out to folks. So shout out, and it is important to me, but I just don't want anyone to feel that they're not contributing. It's just the way that God has you contributing. Isn't that cool? You're either contributing by entering into the dialogue if you're a newbie, even if you don't like what I say, or you could be contributing by contributing in other ways, or you're contributing through Patreon. But everybody's got you. What's the song my wife really likes? All God's creatures got a voice in the choir. Okay, I'm getting it wrong, but it's just a time of night. We'll skip the some sing low and some sing higher because I'm not going to do falsetto this evening. Let's get the PowerPoint up. Now, remember, we're going to have our distractors corner, but that's the beginning slide. Isn't much to say about that now, is there? That's not real complicated. That's the beginning slide, but I wanted a little different look, and I like this clouds thing. That was pretty cool. I like sky scenes and star fields, and right now I like fall scenes because the cactuses don't change here. And so I always get excited about fall scenes. But so that's kind of what I pulled. And so as you can see, like I'm more into words than I am art, but we're learning our way around. So let's keep moving in the thing here. I just want to keep track of this for the incredible Detractors Corner section here. So we're going to go with our first slide. Now, this is going to be our Detractors Corner here, so I want to switch that. I do not want people thinking I agree. I beg to disagree. So I put that up there because it's important that those who watch this later on do not think that my sole existence is to promote Rabbi Tovia Singer. But he is a great source of material. So let me get this going here.
That's what comes across right away in the book of Genesis. The key for every child of God is to restore that they should merge together. God separated them, and then we bring it back together. That's why the greatest vision of dream ever experienced, the most luminous dream is that of Jacob in Bethel, where he sees the ladder connecting the earth to the heaven. So what we're doing when we bring an offering is we're taking the physical, an animal, that's your livestock, that's what belongs to you, and you're raising it up to God. And that's what really all of Judaism is about. That's why Judaism is so That's why Judaism is so much about eating taking the physical and having good food and doing things that are very physical, but making a blessing over it. It's all about taking the physical world and raising it up to the spiritual realm. And that's what we're doing by bringing an offering. People brought offerings. In Ola was completely voluntary. There is a sacrifice for unintentional sins in Leviticus chapter 4, and there's a holy sin sacrifice, but that's for unintentional sins. And that was, if you committed a sin and you weren't careful, you were acting recklessly, but not deliberately, you were not acting out of rebellion, but you should have been more careful, so you've got to rectify that ladder, you've got to fix that ladder, because it's injured, and then you bring a sacrifice. If you're in rebellion against God, then the sacrifice won't help you. Then you must repent. If someone steals in their court, they have to repay. There's no sacrifice that can be brought for that. So that's what the sacrifice is. It's restoring the physical and the spiritual, and it's the people doing what God did. In their court, acting like God, they have to meaning bringing together the physical world with the spiritual world, and restoring what is separated, and then bringing that together in man. And that's why immediately after the creation of man, it's very exquisite. In Genesis, we have the creation of man from the beginning of Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, and God says, "Let us make man." Why? It's not just talking to the angels. The key point is, God is now, instead of creating man out of nothing, as he did light, as he did waters, and God's making man out of everything that has been made. Most importantly, from the physical clay and from the ruach, from the spirit of Hashem. So he's calling everything together and saying, only for man, let us make man. And then when man is made, God said, not it's just good, but behold, it was very, very good. And what do we go to immediately after that? God stops creating, and then God sanctifies the Shabbat. And here is the very delicious part. What happens at that point? We're entering into the book of Genesis. And what is God doing? So interesting, Adam is created without a wife. Everything else that he created, he immediately, there were many, and male and female, but with Adam, when we get to chapter 2, we have a zoom in, and then we're told that Adam is born, and he's looking at every animal, he's naming them according to their character, but he realizes that none of them are compatible with him. And then he longs to be with the one that really is made for him. And God creates a woman out of his own flesh, out of the flesh of a man, and takes her out. And so man, therefore, is searching for his mate, for the one who is compatible, who is spiritually compatible, not just who can produce children, who biologically can replicate. That's not what's critical, is that it's Eza Kenegdo, it's someone who is that other half. And then what happens is very beautiful. See, what man is doing is we're really doing what God is doing. It's back and forth. It's complete interchange because we're creating the image of God. What does God then start doing? If you look at Genesis, Genesis has 50 chapters. What is God doing for 10 chapters? He is looking for his other half. And he finds it in chapter 11 in a man called Abraham. So God is looking for that individual who would recognize him completely and who would be compatible with him completely, and through him would come forth a people who could be a light to the rest of the world. And that's why Abraham, Hashem calls him, the only person who gets such an inscription in Isaiah chapter 41, verse 8 and 9, God calls Abraham my friend. That's a very unusual term, because friend is one of a peer relationship. Now, of course, Abraham is a created being, but God calls him my friend because he is the one who is compatible with God to produce a nation that would be uniquely blessed in that what? They would just be rich and have money? No, they would be a priestly nation. They would be a unique nation, and a priestly nation, and a light to the world. So it's binary. God brings it together in Adam, but Adam now is alone. Adam has to figure out, that there is something missing in his life. And it's not a a creature who he simply can replicate himself with, but someone who really is his Asa Conegdo, his helpmate. And then what happens is then God is doing the same thing because we're creating the image of God. And then God is looking for that family, and he finds in Abraham. Now Abraham has more than one child, so God is then looking for which one of his children would the blessings continue, and then Isaac would have children. Who would it be in him? And then once we have Jacob and his 12 sons, so then we already have the nation that God would use for what purpose? Not that things would be great for all the time, but that they would be the people who would be his son, God's firstborn son, Exodus chapter 4, verse 22, who would represent time, but that they would be the people who would be his son, God's firstborn son, Exodus chapter 4, verse 22, who would represent.
Okay, well, I'm back. Um,
That's
there we go. Sorry about that. We kind of jerked back there. Um, yeah, there's some strains of Kabbalistic thinking that do a little bit more of what he's doing. But I want you to notice that he kind of moves the sacrificial system away from the sin question. This is what kind of keeps coming up with him is that the sacrifice and atonement and sin are the topics that he doesn't seem to really spend a lot of time on. So you guys can go ahead chime in here. What do you think about God like looking for a family here and somehow needing us and being dependent on us? I mean, any thoughts here as he's presented this case that Abraham was somehow his other half? I mean, this should probably elicit some interesting thoughts. Um, because really, when I heard it, I thought, well, um, you know, there's a few problems here that just kind of struck me. And then we'll kind of move on to some questions and analyze his position. But if anyone wanted to chime in, I do love that like button. So if you're new, and actually I will read your responses on. So this can be like totally live. Kind of my answer to a radio program without the radio program. Okay. This is his position. Now, again, there's some Kabbalistic strains of Jewish thought that probably would indeed buy into this. But we've got to ask some real questions here. Okay, so I stuck the questions up. There are only two real questions that really were critical to me. Do Jewish sources agree that the purpose of sacrifices was to unite the spiritual and the physical? I thought that was an important question. Were people created to unite the physical and the spiritual? Is that the purpose of humankind? Now, see, a great comment here. Someone said it seems like he's implying that God created mankind out of some emotional deficiency or necessity for company. Yeah, that's sort of in the background there. Um, I don't think he directly states it, but the implication has some problems. Now, do realize something that is a real question that you have to struggle with if your monotheism is Unitarian as opposed to Trinitarian. Um, it's so funny because I think he will wax eloquent. He debated William Lane Craig. I saw the thing, and on the Trinity, and he just hammers Craig on the Trinity again, and Craig falls into the same exact thing. Uh, um, yeah, and so but Craig's default is always that the New Testament's the only place you find this. And that just gives, again, Singer what he wants. I would say the New Testament explains the Trinity and the Old Testament implies the Trinity. And I'm using Old Testament the way anyone else would use it. And so I'd almost like to take issue with that again. the Old Testament definitely implies a plurality in the Godhead. But that's a whole other thing. He seems to be implying that. Um, let's look at these two questions. I mean, Jewish sources, you guys are going to get some good ones tonight. Uh, but were people really created to unite the physical and spiritual? I think that those two questions, as we look at them, and then we look at whether sacrifice is indicated to be something other than that, will tell us a whole lot. So that's where I am with the questions. Did I miss a question that you think is vital to unraveling Singer's point of view in this video? Maybe there's another question. Now remember, you interrogate someone else's view. Um, so, um, you know, are there some points of interrogation that we missed that are really good interrogation points? Okay, well, I'm not restricting you to the slide, but we do want to keep moving forward, so I want to keep things kind of going. But as we look at this, there may be other questions here. And so I'd encourage you, whenever you hear a worldview, what you need to do is think, okay, if this were true, what would be true about it? Now, you may know it's definitely not true. You may be able to limit it on if this were true, Revelation would agree with it. If this were true, God's character would agree with it. By the way, Revelation will always reveal God's character. But you want to kind of ask some questions. And I just thought these were the two best ones to ask. Now, I put up another slide here. Okay. Um, I see something happening here. Rabbi Singer would be very into the rules, and I think this happens in Judaism to a certain extent, and to Rabbi Singer. And I grew up in Judaism, and we didn't spend a lot of time discussing what God was like. We didn't spend a lot of time at all, really looking. I mean, it was there. We didn't spend a lot of time thinking about the meaning of the stories, except as the rabbis interpreted the stories, and usually that was in terms of how a rule or a custom was kind of developed. And I see a blindness here. If you focus only on the rules and you miss the story, you miss the reason for the rules, and you never get how this thing fits together. And so I think this is key. If you have a Judaism that just focuses on the do's and don'ts, or how we arrive at the do's or don'ts, or whether this do or don't takes precedence over this do and don't, you're missing the whole story. It's like watching a episode of Jane Austen and focusing just on the rules about how the napkins were set up. And this is part of Jesus's complaint. And I think, to be frankly honest, that this is where we have to go. Everything fits back to this. And so this is the exciting thing to me. I'm actually in touch with the story now in Messiah. And really, Judaism didn't spend a lot of time on this. I'm not saying no one ever does. You see Abraham Herschel discussing spirituality. I was looking at Jacob Neusser. He touches on some things. Uh, the other thing is that Rabbi Singer continually ignores the fact that Judaism came out of the foundation. I mean, Christianity came out of the foundation of Judaism, and he keeps treating it like another religion that came from nowhere. So let's deal with our first question, because I think these are worthwhile. Was the purpose of the sacrifices really to unite the spiritual and the physical according to Jewish sources, Jewish thought? Well, you're going to see something come up here. Let's spend a little time with it. Now, the newer JPS versions and commentaries on the Bible are not necessarily as conservative in everything as the old ones were. However, they deal with some scholarship that the old ones wouldn't. So what I'm looking at is the commentary on Leviticus by the JPS, Jewish Publication Society. Oh, sorry. It's not you guys. Out of the you in 1989, so it's pretty recent. And I want you to look at the highlighted part here. Okay, so hopefully you're seeing the highlighted part. Expiation of sins was one of the basic objectives of the sacrificial system. In terms of human needs, little could compare with the urge to secure God's forgiveness. Individuals and communities needed to be assured that they were acceptable in God's sight as well as in the sight of men. So you got that? That's Baruch Levine, Jewish Publication Society. It's a Jewish source. Do you guys see an emphasis on forgiveness connected with the sacrificial system? Because I sure do. In fact, it goes on. I just highlighted the loss of the altar of expiation, the mitzvah kippurah, was a major deprivation. The principle of expiatory sacrifices, most notably chatat, the sin offering, and their disposition was prescribed in Leviticus 6 through 7. And then they go on to point out the rites of Yom Kippur. So it doesn't seem as though Jewish thought relegates the sacrificial system to merely uniting the physical and the spiritual. By the way, the PowerPoints are available. And I'm double checking to make sure that the early ones get early. It may be a little bit of a problem with Thursdays because I'm looking over it and I'm actually getting this divine unction maybe to tweak it a little, but it is ready to go. So that's where we're at. Well, let's keep looking. Now, this is Isidore Singer. This is hysterical to me because I've used Isidore Singer a lot, and it almost seems as though this is a source that Rabbi Singer either ignores or doesn't pay any attention to. And I'm not quite sure why. But the principle of atonement by sacrifice was on the whole adhered to during the Second Temple. Job's intercessors on behalf of his friends was accompanied by a burnt offering. That's very interesting because that's pre-law. And even then it was understood that Job was not giving cows back to God to reunite the physical and the spiritual, right? It was to atone for sins. Wow. In the book of Jubilees, now that is not a canonical writing. That's pseudepigrapha. It's Jewish pseudepigrapha. But you'll notice that Isidore Singer makes use of it because it explains what people were thinking at the time. So he's not afraid to make use of it. We can have non-inspired sources that give us insight into how the audience would have understood certain concepts. And that's just plain good Bible study to dig. Noah and Abraham made atonement for the earth and for man by means of sacrificial blood. Now, what's significant about that is even sources from the Second Temple period did not believe the sacrificial system seemed to be about uniting the physical and spiritual. You can see that. Now, am I using a Jewish source? This gal that got on over the last one really kind of accused me of bouncing all over the place and not using Jewish sources, and shame on me, and that's okay. Because I gave her some Jewish sources. This is a Jewish source. Okay, now I know it's Funkin' Wagnall, but this is a Jewish encyclopedia. And in case you haven't noticed, the name Isidore Singer is not like your average non-Jewish name here. Okay, and this is an encyclopedia. You know, when you were a kid, and you were given an assignment in school. What was one of the sources you would have used? I don't know, but I'd go to my encyclopedia and then look at the bibliography there. So it doesn't seem to be an uncredible source here. Again, it's noted the condition. Sin originally connotated a condition that rendered approach to deity impossible. That's not a Christian saying that. That's a Jewish source saying that. To attend family the communion meal, to correct this, the sacrifice was offered, brought near to, and I put that section in there for an important reason, because he's going to talk about, he talked about the term korban, okay? And so I included that. Korban, more especially blood, which preeminently, belonged to God, and that by means of a priest only. In this connection, it must be remembered that the slaughtering was primarily a sacrificial rite. The meat was not to be eaten unless the deity had received his share. Okay, we're getting a little funny here. Okay, but the point is that essentially, what Isidore Singer, same last name, no less, what Isidore Singer is saying is what? Sin renders someone unable to approach God. It's not a metaphysical problem where man's physical and God's not physical. That doesn't seem to be the problem here. It seems like he's saying sin is a problem, if I'm reading this correctly. Right? Okay, hey, I got to say hi to John. John joined us. Hey, we're allowing for some discussion here, kind of treating it like an interactive classroom or a get together. And I'm doing this live, John. So let me just look at the comment here. Yes, he's pointing out the very thing that's being said by these Jewish sources. I'm just making sure that I'm using Jewish sources to show that, hey, the Jewish sources and the non-Jewish sources agree. Again, Singer continually ignores the fact, and we got to be honest about it, okay? Just honest history here. That Christianity got its foundations locked, from where? And so why should we be shocked? And he keeps sort of ignoring that. And so I'm going to use Jewish sources so that I'm not accused of, hey, you never bother to look at a Jewish source. You're just taking the Gentiles' words for it. And believe me, you will get that sort of thing. This is a Christian interpretation. This is a Jewish source. Okay. I think I've done enough like ethnic fetching about this. Okay, but I think it's important. Now, let's talk about two rabbinical schools here, and some of you may end up wanting to chime in here. Hillel and Shammai. Now, it's very important you understand, you know, um, very important you understand something here. Okay, Hillel and Shammai are very early. They're Tanaim. There were waves of Talmud commentators. So we talk about the two earliest levels of Talmudic commentary, the Tanaim and the Amorim. Okay? And so this is early on. These were the two schools that were big during Jesus's day. When they asked Jesus about divorce, they're really asking him whether he sides with the school of Hillel or Shammai. So this even figures into your New Testament as understanding the background of why Jesus is asked certain questions. Okay, and so the school of Shammai to be kabash, intended to subdue the sins, and that's from the idea of korban, to subdue the sins of Israel, Micah 7:19. And he will subdue our iniquities. Okay? And just pointing out, authorized version, interesting that Isidore uses, until during the year until atonement should do its atoning work. Now, by the school of Hillel, the lamb was to be kabas, to wash Israel. So we're talking about how they would interpret certain words, and they would actually have discussions and elongated things here. Okay, to wash Israel from sin. Now, why did I do this? Well, first of all, you do see some rabbinical writings, and then you also see some biblical references here. And the reason I did this is, in both cases, the purpose of sacrifice, according to the school of Hillel and the school of Shammai, the two early rabbinical schools that were key to understanding the background in the Second Temple period, uh, they both believe sacrifices atoned or cleanse sin. In other words, for them it was about sin. They weren't worried about whether God was finding his perfect other, or whether God was indeed. Now, these threads do have some place in Jewish thought, but but let's not pretend that they're the main or the only thing and that sacrifice wasn't stood the other way. We need to understand it very much was understood the other way, and there may have been additional understandings of what sacrifice did, but certainly sacrifice was about sin, and the barrier between man and God was moral, not simply metaphysical, which is what is implied by taking this view of sacrifice. When I say metaphysical, having to do with the nature of, okay, God being God and not being physical, and then man being physical, okay? A difference in nature. It's not simply a difference in substance, and and it's not simply, there's a real sin problem here. Now, one of the things you'll notice is he mentions the term korban. I hope you paid attention to that. That's a key term for an offering, and so he waxes eloquent on korban, and he relates it to the verb karav, which we're going to see, and he sort of indicates that the meaning of korban is the idea of drawing near, but drawing near to unite. Like God's uniting the physical and spiritual, and the drawing near is to draw near to unite. And so I think it's a great time to introduce word study here. This is a wonderful time. It's something that you should use all the time, and you guys are aware of it. But, as far as my live audience, if you're listening in and you're not aware about word study, you're going to learn some cool stuff about word study. So this is not a complete exegetical word study where I looked in certain books to see how the word's used, and I've done those. I did those in seminary. A real cool exercise, by the way. Follow the way a certain term is used in a certain book and see what the author's saying about it. That's the way to come up with a systematic theology, by the way. But I did do a little word study here, and you guys have seen me do this before, okay? So I'm sticking the first slide up here, okay, and I'm going with the noun. Now, he does relate the word korban, noun, to a word. And someone pointed out something very good. Yes, his sort of objection, his sort of interpretation is very ad hoc. It's very just, I'm just saying this. By the way, the right way to do this, now I know he plays with korban, but the right way to do this would have been to do what we're doing here. Okay? I mean, is that the typical understanding of the word now? Was that the understanding of the word then? What is the usage of the verb? What other related writings? Of course, I'm going to use the Septuagint, so he's not going to be happy with me. Okay? But what is being said is that, even for him, a cursory reading of the Old Testament seems to mitigate against what he's implying. Yes. Somebody put that in the chat. I know who put it. I'm going to try this. Corinth, put that in the chat, and that's dead on. Okay? But let's dig a little further. Let's talk about korban, because he's raised it. The offering, Hebrew korban, offering in a generic sense for anything presented to God. Now notice, he's going to relate it to karav. When one approaches karav, his sanctuary. Is it about uniting the physical and the spiritual? Doesn't seem to, according to this defining here by Baruch Levi in his commentary on Leviticus, the book that's the manual about these things, right? It's what's presented to God when one approaches, comes near. See, and he's pointing out the connection between the verb and the noun there. Okay? Korban. This is Leonard J. Coops. Now, someone's going to object. Is this a Jewish source? No. Hey, there's a fallacy, and I want to alert you to it. Okay? I want to alert you to this fallacy. It's called the genetic fallacy. Truth doesn't change based on who's saying it. Okay? If somebody you don't like says something, It doesn't change whether it's true or not. So that's very important. So I can use non-Jewish sources, and they aren't automatically eliminated because they're not Jewish. By the way, the Orthodox will do that. That's a Christian interpretation. Huh. Well, one, that wouldn't mean it's a wrong interpretation, and two, it wouldn't mean it's any less scholarly or accurate. And so my response to that is truth is truth. So let's look at this. Korban, offering oblation. RSV is the, you know, it's a Bible translation, renders it oblation to RSV's offering. They're just pointing out. The noun denotes, now notice this, that which is brought near, i.e., an offering to deity, both in the sense which it has to be sacrificed, such used of the cultic sacrifices and offerings, or merely as which is destined to be used in the sanctuary. Okay? So here's what we're looking at. It's a non-Jewish source, but it's a scholarly source, and it's a valid source, and what's being said is true. By the way, Gleason Archer is not a slouch, and he's the editor of this. Okay? So where does that bring us? Well, let's keep going here. He goes on to say, now notice he's using scripture here. He related the word to korban. He related the word to karav, to be brought near. We're going to talk about the verbal form in just a little bit. But notice something here. He goes to Exodus 3:5, which is Moses' calling, where he's actually in the presence of God. No small thing here. Okay? The technical use of the verb is cultic and denotes every step performed in presenting the offering of God. The idea begins to develop with Moses drawing near to God. Same verbal idea. I do have to say hi to a dear friend who's in the room, who I didn't expect to see. I am so excited to see him. We've actually sat down and talked together and been able to do stuff together because he's right here in Phoenix. And so I hope to see him again. And I misspelled the word hi. Well, there you go. I've created a new shortcut. We can maybe start using that as an abbreviation, right? Okay. Later at Sinai, the people executed the same care in what? Approaching the holy mountain. What? Uniting with the holy mountain? Approaching the holy mountain. Was the holy mountain being given to God to unite the physical and spiritual? That's not the idea here. Okay, and so we're just emphasizing that this idea of approaching does not infer uniting necessarily the way that Singer seems to be kind of inferring it does, and tilting it away from atonement. Now let's talk about the word karav. Now I love this. You guys are going to be able to see a Hebrew verb. Okay, we'd say that's in the kal state. You start dealing with things in the kal state. When we had to learn to conjugate, okay, you talk about perfect and imperfect, and you've got that in the state that you'd start conjugating from, karav. And here's what's interesting. Septuagintal studies is really useful. Now, the Jewish community didn't always love the Septuagint, but the reality is the Septuagint was an attempt to take Hebrew thought, and since our New Testament is in Greek, Hebraic thinking had to be expressed in Greek. Okay, in the sense that there were concepts that weren't part of the Greek society that were part of the monotheistic Hebrew society. And so the Septuagint really acts like a Rosetta Stone. Now, I'm not saying don't go back to the original Hebrew. What I'm saying is a cool thing because it creates a bridge between the Greek in the New Testament and the Hebrew in the Old Testament. And so the equivalent Agnazo is used for karav. So when I look at verses and I go to the Septuagint, the verb karav is related to the Greek verb agnazo. Okay? Now, what's interesting about agnazo is as you look at the New Testament, it is not have the idea of uniting. In fact, in one verse that I looked at in the Gospels, they drew near to Jesus to lay hands on him. Well, they aren't uniting the physical with the spiritual there. Okay? And so that idea of uniting there is not the main idea when they tried to take that term and bring it to an equivalent Greek concept. By the way, there were over 1 million Jews in Alexandria that spoke Greek. And the Septuagint wasn't just useful for New Testament studies. There were a lot of Jews that used the Septuagint. In fact, that's why you have the comment in Acts about the Greek-speaking or Hellenistic Jews and the Hebrew speakers. Okay? Because there was a large portion of the Jewish population that made use of the Greek translation. And if you haven't clicked like, this is your little Jewish nudge. Okay. So, let's talk about Hebrew here. Did God not have a term for unite in Hebrew? Actually, there are plenty of good, there are words for this. Okay? There's one real important one, yechid. Okay, echad is used, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, echad, but that means oneness in a certain sort of sense and has some connotations to it. Not that it can't mean one, okay? But the point is, yechid is a different word, and God isn't referred to as a yechid. So even though that kind of can be there, there's a separate word. So, let's look at yechid. Okay, take thy son, thy only son Isaac, yechid ben. Okay? And what I want to point out here is, except for beyond the implications for the triunity or plurality in the Godhead, let's just talk about yechid. As far as something very unique about yechid, the word yechid only is also used in certain verbal forms to mean unite. There's a stem, a binyan. Now you're going to say, what's that? I'm not going to go too far into Hebrew, but here's what you need to understand that helps. Here's something that ends up helping with this, okay? We have different ways of dealing with different verbs. Okay, we'd say brought. In Hebrew, you'd say caused to go. You have stems. I just used the word, okay? You have stems. And those stems indicate how the verb is being expressed, okay? So, if I want to say unite, cause to become one, and I use a causative of yechid. All right? And so unitedness is related to yechid, and it can be used as an adverb in union, together, all together, together alike, both appearing together 134 times. The Septuagint primarily translates it with one mind or unanimously, okay? And they're just pointing out so question, I mean, given the nature of the fact that there's another Hebrew word, the verb doesn't indicate uniting, karav, to come near. It's used in terms that isn't metaphysical, but actually relates to moral. Okay, given that, Given that korban is used of the sacrificial system, given um, given the nature that Jewish thought doesn't even buy this as a rule, um, does his interpretation seem to have the preponderance of the evidence to it? I mean, something seems amiss as I look at this. Um, it just seems like this doesn't seem normative. This seems kind of misplaced here. Okay. Anyone out there want to hazard to guess? I know we shouldn't get into motives. Uh, why Rabbi Singer might like that interpretation of sacrifice better than it being for sin? You know, given the nature of him, and Judaism not having a temple, and the emphasis on Jesus dying for sin. Why does this interpretation of uniting things work better for him? I'll entertain that if someone wants to chime in. I'm not good with radio silence, but I welcome comments. And there have been some great ones. I sort of like that. Yeah. Um, and that's why I think it needs to be challenged. It needs to be challenged because I think it's off. And I think the fact that he's Tovia Singer doesn't afford him carte blanche. So, um, but I see some theological reasons that he might not like it being about sin too. I feel like any interpretation that backs up the truth of Christianity, he wants to find an alternative for. It's just the way it seems to come off. But I also see that Jewish sources don't back up some of these kind of stranger things here. So that's Karav. Let's talk about the purpose of man. Now, I did something here to try and show that Jewish sources do at least have some room to acknowledge the narrative that you and I would acknowledge to an extent. What is the purpose of people? By the way, not quoting to me the Westminster Confession of Faith, just going with the Genesis account, which is probably listed up there. Okay. It says Genesis chapter 1 give us the purpose for human beings. And, I think it does. By the way, this is a quote from Pirkei Avot. Let me give you a little background. It's the sayings of the fathers. I always call it the best of the Talmud. I really do, because Pirkei Avot has some really good stuff in it. Stuff that you and I can use, just wise sayings that have been influenced through contact with the scriptures. Okay? We don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater either. If something agrees with the Bible, but it wasn't said by a believer, again, genetic fallacy doesn't mean it's not true. See, the genetic fallacy says truth is determined by the individual expressing it or where it came from. That's a fallacy. Let's look at this. In that respect, he is preeminent. That's referring to Adam and man over all other creatures. But, humankind represents the culminating work of creation. Beloved is man. By the way, man includes women, but Pirkei Avot doesn't express it that way. Beloved is man, for he was created in the image of God, but it was by a special love that it was made known to him that he was created in the image of God. As it is said, in the image of God he made, should be he made man, but Pirkei Avot made he man. A little bit old English sort of when it's translated. That's okay. Pirkei Avot seems to agree that the purpose of man is to be an image bearer, unless I've missed something here. Okay. But it looks like even the rabbis, like when they were reading through Genesis, they actually like saw the line here and figured it out. And so the purpose of man is not necessarily to provide a partner for God. That has some really weird connotations to it. That somehow God needed a partner, and he was lonely. By the way, you'll get that from Muslims in a sense. That God, wanted to have someone to go ahead and worship him as if he somehow needed it. Okay? Let's deal with the second question, okay, which we've already started to deal with. Is really the main purpose of human beings to unite the spiritual and the physical, have little children? It almost sounds like Mormonism to me. You know? It gets weird, okay? And we sort of dealt with this slide, so I'm gonna spin past it. Now, we talked about hell and Judaism and said they don't view it quite the same way. But yes, Judaism does sort of teach a hell, although modern Judaism shies away from it. As far as historically, yes, Judaism indeed had the concept of divine punishment. You won't get that from Reform Jews today, and you might not get it from conservative Jews today. And you'll notice that Tovia gets very mad over that doctrine. Where do you think people had heard about it when Jesus talks about Gehenna and Sheol? He says, well, it's there. It's not very preeminent. Hey, look, God doesn't have to repeat something a dozen times. Let's see if he indeed connects death and hell. Well, Genesis certainly does, right? 2:16 and 17. The Lord commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden you may freely eat. It's NKJV. But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day you eat of it you shall die. Now, is that really contrary? I mean, did no one pick up on this during the Second Temple period? Death is held to be the consequence of sin it should probably be in a sinless person it would be necessarily be immortal. No death without sin. Did you hear that? That's not a Christian saying that. That's not some sort of Gentile gloss on the scriptures, the way Rabbi Singer would put it. I'm reading a Talmud tractate, Shabbat 55a. There is no death without sin. Wow, that also sounds like Romans. The wages of sin is death. Paul was educated by Hillel's great grandson in the strictest form of Jewish thought of the day. You think that he may indeed be saying something that he knew to be consistent with what the Bible taught and what even people who were among the Jewish people who took the scriptures seriously understood? I think so. Sin must be atoned for. Now, am I making this up? No. These are called the 13 attributes of God's mercy. I love this. This is repeated 5 times in the scripture. Boy, if you could pick a memory verse, take verse 34:6. I mean, it's just so cool. God is gracious, merciful, slow to anger, abounding in loving kindness and truth, or in love and truth. Wow. Isn't that cool? I mean, that's like describing God's greatness. Okay? But when you get to 7, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin. But look at this. By no means clearing the guilty. Okay? In other words, God doesn't just wink at sin. Sin has to be atoned for. And sin has ramifications. It has ramifications beyond me. visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, the children's children to the third and fourth generation. Sin has real consequences. Okay? Can God just wink at sin? No. By the way, that's not just something that just comes up. I remember hearing Madeline Murray O'Hare say that the God of the Old Testament was, of the God of wrath of the Old Testament was killed by the God of the love, the God of love of the New Testament. I mean, this is crazy. This is all there. Okay, so let's get to some conclusions here. Okay? Did we see tonight that the Jewish view of the purpose of sacrifices does not substantiate the idea that the purpose of sacrifices was primarily to unite the physical and spiritual? This is an interpretation of Rabbi Singer which is not upheld by Jewish thought as a whole. Did we see that? Well, I think that was pretty well demonstrated. Human beings were created to be image bearers, not primarily to unite physical and spiritual reality. Now, I had to tip my hat. I have to be intellectually honest. This view may be held in certain pantheistic religions, the New Age movement, which I'll be addressing Sunday night in our Ambassadors Club and introducing to, and elements of Kabbalah. Do you ever wonder why certain stars go for Kabbalah right now? Because it has some elements in it that they could kind of relate to. John Williams made a neat comment. It isn't directly related to this slide, but it is related to God's attributes. That they had the idea that sin resulted in the blind man being blind. Who sinned, him or his parents, that he should be born blind? And Jesus says that the glory of God might be manifested. And I really like that comment. John, thank you very much for that. Human beings were created to be image bearers, not primarily to. Now, I know the Kabbalah has the idea of the uniting of the Shekinah with God and the fact that mitzvot does that and we're repairing the world to Kum Olam in some sort of spiritual sense, but that's not what we see as the basic thing. So I've given a nod that there are elements of Jewish thought there. I want to be honest, but that's not the main thing. Here's the final point. Rabbi Singer misses the meta-narrative of the Tanakh in an attempt to remove a strong emphasis on the expiation of sin. The reality is that the Tanakh is all about how God's going to restore his creation and deal with sin, and Rabbi Singer ignores the big story of Scripture, which really excites me now, and it's so sad that so many of my countrymen don't see how this fits together. Of course, Paul talks about the veil being removed. But folks, if you count the story, then your Judaism is terribly anemic. You need to understand what it's about. Now, some Jewish writers get pretty close. I see Nusser talking about things sometimes, and I go, "Yeah, you're onto something." But he doesn't take it far enough. Okay, so that's basically the presentation here. As far as the material for tonight. That doesn't mean that, as I said, we're interactive here. But that's basically what we're looking at. And I like the way this went tonight. We're, kind of working through things here. It's really exciting to have some new folks in the house, or at least newer. And so it's great. Okay, somebody made a comment with the transliteration. I know, can't do Hebrew. Actually, you can do Hebrew with the Hebrew. Okay. Oh, good. I didn't conflict with, for you folks that don't know, me and Vocab are friends. Hey, by the way, plug in if you are in Phoenix or can get to Phoenix. And John's, I saw somebody I know from Phoenix. The Doctrine on the Block conference is in February. I will be doing a breakout session. And we set it up so that people in Phoenix could go out and do First Fridays afterwards. So That's just for the folks in the Phoenix area hood here who want to come join us. So we're going to have some folks that are street folks that do some of what I do. So that's kind of exciting. Well, if Vocab's going live and I can give him the freedom to do so, then that's exciting. I think I talked with him this morning. He was doing something related. Well, he's doing some stuff related to that topic there that he's really got cornered. The Black Hebrew Israelites. Oh, I'm so excited. I was asked to do something about similarities between Judaism and Catholicism as far as the book of Hebrews. Kind of ceremonialism in all its forms and some of that stuff. Oh, I'm so excited. Nate's going to be there. Okay, I can see the Hebrew. Condescension. Okay, it helps. Yes, I recognize the Ein Suf. So there's some Kabbalistic allowed for conceptual space, which is finite. Yeah, the withdrawing or contracting of the Ein Suf, and that creates a breach between God and His creation, and then you have to have the reuniting, and the Shekinah is a way of breaching that gap, and it gets quite Kabbalistic. Just be aware that some Hollywood types aren't very Jewish, but they recognize some concepts that they could relate to, and they thought it would be good for them, and so they went all Kabbalah, uh, you know, so. I didn't know Doctrine on the Block was going to be on YouTube. I hope my session ends up making it on there too. Be praying for that session because I need material on Catholicism. So if you guys have some sites and you want to put it in comments or even like text me or something, or next week, I have to get a hold of the Catholic Catechism. I know some things, but you just got to understand this nice Jewish boy didn't spend a lot of time with Catholic priests. And so I know where I'm going, but I want to make sure that I'm honest with some sources there too. So that is so cool. Well, it's about that time, but this has been great. So I've got to figure out how in the world you do this, okay? And then we got a few minutes to talk. You guys are wonderful, and it's good to have new folks. And tomorrow might be a little shorter. It's the similitudes, and most of you guys, if it's okay with the patrons, I'd like to look things over. So I'll be posting the latter PowerPoint probably right before the broadcast. And then I promised folks at a certain level they'd get it early. I'll make sure it's there in the morning. Okay? So I don't know if you're here, but it looks like most of the folks on patrons. If that's okay with my patrons, I'm going to be a little tardy. I'll send you, but I'll get it out there. But I'm just looking at the outline going, maybe I can improve this just a little. Maybe I can't. So that's where we're at. Oh, wow. One of the folks there says he was an altar boy. Hey, if you want to throw up something, good question. The rabbis ended up doing that. And that's where they got the idea. How the rabbis arrive at it? Well, there's some different theories out there. Some say it came later. The others say certain communities, like the Yemenite community, did it. I just don't see it in Torah. And so that's even being reevaluated by certain branches of Judaism. So that's kind of where that's at. Someone asked, what do I need to do? I didn't understand the question, but what do I need to do to prepare for Doctrine on the Block, or what do I need to do to the PowerPoint? I think there's just an area of the PowerPoint that it could be expanded a little better. So, um, so I'm just thinking of it. It's okay as it is, but I went, wow, there's something I didn't say that maybe I should. So I'll look at it again. I was going to post it tonight, but I want to get a fresh look at it in the morning. So we will get that out. Alrighty. Well, this has been live, and it's been great having everything going on, and some really good chime in, and an excellent typing of Hebrew in a chat session. That's awesome. So, really cool. Okay. Okay. I'm going to just say a thanks. Just type a quick thanks. Cool. Well, I'm going to end the stream, and you guys who are going over to vocab, say hi for me. And you will be all set. And a shout out to John. Glad that clarification helped. I'm going to put a thanks all for watching. Okay, quick question. How did you guys get a high five as an emoticon? Because this isn't showing emoticons anymore. Oh well. If you're late, it's no problem. I love you being here, and I love you watching stuff. So I'm going to do this. There are some things I remember how to do. Look at that. This is from the old days when we didn't have emoticons and you had to figure it out. And you could do this. And let's see if this still works. It does. No, it doesn't. Okay. Good night, all. And have fun at vocabs.